And today we have some questions from viewers, which we'll cover, but also it's worth talking about, I think, some of your observations, having been in the U.S. now for about a month, I guess, or at least about that.
Yeah, pretty much. I guess other than just hanging around here, the big thing was going to Freedom Fest, which has turned into quite a circus, actually. I went to the first one that Mark and Joanne Skousen put on, was it 10 years ago? I think so. Actually, Mark started Freedom Fest, which this year had about 2,600 paid attendees.
Wow.
Pretty
big.
impressive, yeah. In Vegas. And Mark actually got the idea for that, which he acknowledges, from the Era Society, which I ran for many years in Aspen, Colorado, which was a private party that cost me a lot of money every year. And I invited people to come to it that I wanted to meet.
So it's like Eris, except it's not invite only and it's not free.
No, it's not free, and it's actually quite commercial.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons. Well, it's like everything else, including Eris. It's that the second law of thermodynamics rules the universe, and that includes conferences where they start out exclusive and focused and with the right people and all this type of thing. And they expand, and they get fat, and they get sloppy, and they get corrupt.
Yeah.
And not to downgrade Freedom Fest, because it's pretty good.
It's a good event, yeah.
It's a good event, and a lot of people really like it, but a lot of the speakers are also exhibitors, which is kind of pay for play.
Yes.
So it's a problem.
Yeah, that's what I think a lot of people don't know, that when they go to conferences, a lot of people that you have never really heard of before that are on the panels.
Yeah, what are they doing here?
Yeah, they paid to be there as sponsors, yeah.
I know, it really annoyed me when I was on a panel with Van Simmons and Jeff Phillips.
Two really deep experts about the gold market and gold stocks.
And Adrian Day, who knows a lot about this stuff. And so four of us thought we were just going to chat with each other about the nature of the gold markets and all that. And some guy inserts himself there in the middle, and we didn't know what was going on. And he starts dominating the conversation, saying, I'm a professor at some nothing nowhere college, and I run money. And it turned out that he was an exhibitor that had the right to be on a panel that somebody would actually come to the panel, because nobody would. Anyway,
was he go to his exhibit booth? Yeah.
And
it's just the nature of these conferences.
We weren't about to denounce him. That would have been kind of
rude.
Anyway, rude, yeah. So,
but it does seem like they should have like the plaque in front of their name on the table or something should say paid speaker or something just like so you know.
Or it at least introduced us to him, so we'd give us some time to figure out how we want to relate to this dude.
Right. Exactly.
Anyway, so that Freedom Fest was nice, and what else?
We talk about what else? Was it free? Last year they went to South Dakota because it was open, and so it was one time it was actually outside of Vegas.
Yes.
And even then there were some people wearing masks. Some people that seemed like, I don't know, really weren't very free.
Well, it was interesting. Two observations about the lingering COVID hysteria. At Freedom Fest, of all places, which is libertarians and free thinkers and
those who market to them.
That's right. And I would say that only 1% at most of the audience were masked. I'd be so embarrassed to be masked in that crowd. It's like identifying to people. I'm kind of stupid, but here I am. But it's different because, like, flying back from Vegas to Washington, D.C., where I flew back to, I was sitting there watching people walk down the aisle.
Yeah.
And about 15% of the people on the plane were masked. And the interesting thing to me, as I observed them, was that they were overwhelmingly either black people and or women. That's who they were. So I don't know what conclusion we can draw from that, but 15%, that's a lot, because the hysteria is basically over. They're not wearing, nobody was wearing a face shield anymore.
No, that's good. Yeah.
That's right.
That's the quadruple layered stuff. Double masking, face shield, and gloves, and goggles. I've seen that before. But
on the other hand, I'm not opposed to that, because in the general public, when somebody's wearing a mask, it's like, wearing an identifier saying, I'm not very bright. I'm
potentially dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. Stay away. It's potentially extremely dangerous to get to know me better.
Exactly.
And not because of COVID either.
Right, yeah, just your judgment is flawed.
Yeah,
skewed, broken in some
and
way.
you're probably a member of the enemy team.
Have to be,
Besides.
yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's very much like hate speech, which, it's in bad taste, but I like to see people use it because how they talk, then I can figure out who I'm dealing with. But if nobody can say anything but like the 500 basic words to communicate, then how do you know who you're really dealing
Exactly.
with? So.
Yeah. Well, are there any surprises being back in the U.S. or the things, because we see the doom and gloom constantly. We talk about the doom and gloom constantly on this podcast.
We do. Yeah. One thing that I found interesting on the way to Vegas, I flew United Airlines, where I have several million miles with United alone. And it was most disappointing from every point of view, starting with airport waiting area at Dulles. It was a large waiting area. Apparently used to have lots of seats where you could sit and wait for your plane. It was mostly just empty floor space where they'd somehow removed the seats, and the plane, which was full, 1/3 of the people were standing, 1/3 were sitting on the floor, and 1/3 were sitting in the remaining seats. I said, this is horrible management.
Yeah.
That this would be, and of course the flight itself was kind of crappy. The food was crappy. Everything just seemed substandard. On the way back, for what it's worth, American, where I also have several million miles, but not as many as United, it was vastly better. The food was better. Everything was better. And it's rare that I found a difference between these two.
Yeah, it's like Coke or Pepsi basically before, but
Pretty much. Yeah, but now I found there was a huge difference. So anyway, that's my boots on the ground experience in America. One other thing, though kind of interesting, is we went to a very upmarket restaurant, type of thing you do in Vegas, at Bellagio, Michael Mina. And, Bellagio's really, that's a class act, it's ritzy. Yeah. So we went to this restaurant, it was somebody's birthday party, and we're sitting there, and a crowd started milling through the restaurant. This is very unusual because it's not like an obvious restaurant that's saying, come here, it's exclusive. And about 100 or 150 started coming right through there and moving, what's going on here? And there was nobody knows. You can't find these things out. People thought, was it a shooting in Vegas? Or was it, who knows? It was a broken glass. Why?
So there's something triggered
happened.
a stampede of people
And not
evacuating.
And for some reason, among other places, they all wound up going through this exclusive little restaurant, Michael Mina. But what was very interesting was that I went off to play poker later, but couldn't play poker because they closed down the poker rooms in Bellagio and 2 other places. Now, why would they do that? Close down the table games? None of this made any sense. And here's the weirdest thing. This is the crazy thing. We were staying at Mirage, and we were on the 28th floor. So you open the windows when you're going to leave, so you get light to see what's going on. And the window was cracked, the way an auto windshield is when you get a stone strike. And it looked like there was a stone strike at the bottom.
What floor was this?
28th. So it
Not a stone strike.
and a bird couldn't have been flying at that altitude, that speed.
Enough to...
Could it have been a bullet somehow? Who knows? And then that led me to thinking, we were in Vegas in 2017 when the mass shooting took place at the...
MGM?
Was it the MGM? No, it was some other place. And so, as usual, to get boots on the ground, late breaking news, you always ask the taxi driver.
Yeah.
And so when we were driving into Vegas, I said, so what happened here 5 years ago with that mass shooting?
This is the guy who shot 500 people, right?
Yeah, and killed 60.
Yeah.
Killed 60 people. This is a big deal. You shoot 500 people and kill 60. This is a big deal. And it came and went. And we've heard nothing more about it. And I thought, with Vegas being the headquarters of crime scene, CSI, crime scene investigation, they'd be all over this. This is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
So they came up with some story about some guy who brought 15 or 20 ARs and AKs, but they weren't very specific about this, up to the room and started shooting into the crowd. I asked myself, well, what about the autopsies on these people? I'd like to know exactly what happened because they can tell from the
angle to
bullet strike and all that. And I said, is it reasonable? I guess if he's using a bump stock, they weren't automatic weapons, but they're for practical purposes, fire almost as quickly. Because a lot of people, including the taxi driver, says, no, he said, that's all bullshit. People were firing from outside the crowd into the crowd, and maybe that guy was up there, but that wasn't real. And the interesting thing, here's another thing. They said, and this is all over the internet, said he was a professional gambler who specialized in slot machines. Now, this is nonsense on its face. I mean, these are like, mathematically fixed to return anywhere from 90 to 98%, depending on of your money. You can't be a professional gambler doing that.
Right.
So that's what it said, and everybody bought, oh, okay. But it was obviously a money laundering scheme where you buy, big tickets and then you're paid off on a certain percentage and all that. So what happened? All kinds of funny things. No investigation, end of story.
Yep.
And was MBS from Saudi Arabia
Right.
in the Florida, that was said.
Yep.
And that kind of went through the news cycle. I don't know.
Yeah. But we do know now there could have been an assassination attempt on you.
Well,
who knows? I mean, it looks like a bullet.
Well, I listen, if I still had a certain publisher promoting my newsletter, they'd say, yes, this man is
he would make it the copy.
So important. It was clearly an assassination attempt when maybe it was just a random bullet. But who knows? Nobody ever, you don't find out about these things.
But it is pretty insane that that happened. So
I don't have a rational explanation for it.
yeah, it couldn't be a bird. I know that's what you said. Those, yeah.
No, and it wasn't a truck kicking up a rock on the 28th floor either.
No.
So.
No. So any other observations, though, in your time here in the U.S. that you think, or anything you were surprised about? Because, again, we talk about doom and gloom stuff. We talk about the economy basically on the brink of disaster. But what's the experience?
In Vegas, people are generally one of two types. They're either, fit, muscular people that maybe they go to Vegas because they're in the show business or something. But most of them are grossly overweight. And this is one of the many, many, health disasters that were created by COVID, is that I gained 20 pounds somehow during COVID.
As did I, yep.
Everybody, and these people in Vegas gained at least that much. So the average American is degrading further, kind of seems to me.
Yeah, but we don't see anything. I mean, there's no riots, which I actually kind of expected we'd see more protests or riots this summer.
Summer's getting late, so they better get the show on the road.
Exactly.
Here.
Yeah, so that's been interesting and all. And I mean, my experience here basically has been that everything is normal, except for there definitely been fuel prices higher, a lot more gas stations I've been to, you'd see the plastic bag, on the pump because they're out. I had that a couple times. And food prices are more expensive. But other than that, everybody's living like it's 1999 still, That's kind of the vibe I get.
It seems that way so far. The big thing that's on my mind is that we do have elections coming up. The election season is going to approach in October and early November, obviously. The Bolsheviks are in office. They do not want to lose power. Mm-hmm. They'll do anything they can to keep power. So,
including rotating through the sitting president, maybe putting him back, taking him off out of the starting lineup because he has COVID now.
That's why I and so damn many other people I grew up have cancer.
Oh no, he said he had cancer, didn't he?
Well, he does have cancer, but then he came yesterday. He said he had COVID.
No, he's a very confused old fellow at this point.
I think everyone's starting to realize that.
And everybody's afraid to see him. But how do I know what the average American thinks? But I can't believe the average American be so stupid that they want to have Kamala as president.
But I think it's not even up to us. It doesn't matter.
Not.
And but it does seem like, well, they did announce he had COVID yesterday, and this is convenient for potentially giving an excuse for other cascading health issues. Why the Hunter Biden laptop stuff is now much more public.
And was it somebody said that it was about the 1-year anniversary of his declaring publicly that if you get the vaccine, you will not get COVID?
Yeah, on the anniversary of one of the first time he said that. Yes.
So how's he going to walk that back?
Well,
he doesn't have to.
He avoided severe symptoms from it, but maybe he dies from it, and then I don't know.
Or dies from something else or anything else, and people are randomly dying like young athletes, very unusual, and other young people just dying and strange things. But how do we really know? Because I don't trust the news reporting if it doesn't fit the narrative.
Right. So, but leading up to the election, it's a big inflection point, and so lots can happen between here and there. And one of the things that my conspiratorial-minded self thinks is that the rotation of it's that Biden has outlived his usefulness, and so it's being recognized by the Democratic Party now, and they're making some moves for that. So I would definitely I don't expect him to be around even for the midterms.
Yeah, and frankly, I've got to admit that I'm increasingly coming around to your point of view that conspiracies really do exist. It's like our friend Jim Kunstler, that whenever he refers to the Biden administration or Joe Biden, he puts it in quotes, Joe Biden, who's not a real person. It's like he's the puppet being controlled by, we're not quite sure who.
Yeah, we don't know who, but
it's not him.
They'll be there once he resigns and is replaced by Kamala.
And who would leave a space open for Nancy Pelosi or for Hillary?
I think my guess would be, I was speculating Hillary about 6 months ago.
But I think Nancy Pelosi is she's next in the batting lineup that they have, right?
I mean,
isn't it supposed to be one person and then the Secretary of State? And then you get down to like number 15, so Mayor Pete may think he's
like 8 heartbeats away.
Yeah, or maybe 16. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so she's technically the next in line, but I don't even know how it works exactly for how the vice president is replaced. I don't know technically how that works.
I don't know either. At some point, we're going to get a strong man who's going to say, I'm in charge here. And he's going to grab that government by the throat. And if they don't kill him, he's going to mold things in the way that he thinks are right. A Mussolini or a Hitler or a Stalin or a Mao or
a Hillary Clinton.
Or yes, we're ripe for that type of thing, because when things get bad, people are going to want somebody that says, I can make it better. Leave it to me. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm willing. And I'll make an early prediction. In 2024, the Democratic candidate will be a general. A general, because the war in the Ukraine is not going away soon, or the war against Russia, in effect. So we need a general who claims to know about this stuff. And generals today are all very presentable. They're
politicians.
They're fit. Yep, exactly. And once you get to be a general in the U.S. Army, I mean, what you've proved is not any military competence necessarily, but that you're really good at politicking and backslapping and backstabbing.
Yep. Okay. So are there any other potential flashpoints you see happening in the U.S. between now and the election, and what might they be? Because it's, like I said, it's an inflection point.
Yeah. Well, collapse of the part of the housing market that is financed dependent on mortgages. Mm-hmm. So how many people are living under bridges now and will be kicked out of their houses because they can't afford the rent or they can't make the mortgage payments? I don't know. So that's a possibility. And pension funds have been hurt very badly with raised interest rates.
I saw like CalPERS had lost, of their $46 billion capital that they have, they had lost so far this year something like $7 billion.
Oh,
this year. That's a major loss for them. Those numbers aren't exactly right, but they're very close to that.
And I don't think it's billions. I think that's way too small, because billions are not very...
For CalPERS?
Is that right?
Yeah, for the teacher. That's the teacher's pension fund.
This is a problem when the dollar loses value. You forget, are we talking about...
Trillions?
Millions? Billions? Trillions?
You're right. I don't actually remember what... I just remember the front number.
Yeah, I should whip out my Zimbabwe $100 trillion bill.
Right, yeah.
And I think I pointed out before, the guy that printed it up, Gideon Gono, when I went to Zim the last time, or then, it was 6 years ago now, that we socialized quite a bit. And we got to bed, had dinner at his house a couple times and all this type of thing. And Gideon was actually a decent guy. And he's the one that signed his name. He was Mugabe's personal banker which means that, I'm sure Gideon was worth $100 million or whatever. But he's the one that signed his name on the $100 trillion bill. And but he gave me personally, I may have said this before, but it's a fact, he gave me a hand-typed monograph that he'd written on a gold-backed dollar for Zimbabwe. He was actually advocating for that. But it was completely impossible. And I said, well, Gideon, you knew what was going to happen when you printed up these $100 trillion bills. 100 trillion. I mean, that's a lot of zeros. I mean, you get confused. And he said, yes, but it was necessary because the army had to be paid. And of course, after Mugabe left, I think the next guy that took over was the head of the army. And that was my big mistake when I was meeting all the hotshots in Zimbabwe, is not having gone out of my way to meet the generals.
Live and learn.
I know. But am I gonna go back to some dog shit country and go through that drill again?
I find it funny though that the central banker who printed the Zimbabwean currency into oblivion is a fan of yours.
Quite amazing. And not only that, but when we went to he played, and I told Porter this, and Porter was not. I would have thought Porter would have lit up and said, wow, that's interesting. But he played me a CD that he had of Porter Stansbury giving us speech on money and all this type of thing.
Really?
True story.
That's amazing.
It is amazing, actually. I mean, this is, in the real world, I mean, these weird things happen that you just wouldn't even believe.
Do you think Jerome Powell's a subscriber of yours?
I
doubt it.
I just wonder what's going to happen to Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen when the economy really collapses.
Yeah. So do you think that there's a chance that we see an actual, the stock market's obviously way down, and commodities have recently come down. Gold has been really hurt in the last year, gold stocks. So do you see that situation worsening between now and the election? Meaning things getting crushed more, the market's breaking, some contagion spreading, or do you think we'll kind of muddle along from here?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, the Federal Reserve has to keep printing up money because they're the only ones that can finance the U.S. government deficit. So if the U.S. government's going to pay its bills, it needs to have freshly printed currency from the Fed deposited in commercial bank accounts. So that's going to continue. The only thing they can really manipulate at this point, I think, are interest rates. And if they take them much higher, then what's going to happen to the people that are the housing market? And this is very problematical. I mean, it seemed like they'd painted themselves into a corner so many times in the past. And people have been asking themselves this question. I remember they were asking this question since I got involved in all this stuff in the late 60s and the early 70s. Is it going to be catastrophic deflation or is it going to be runaway inflation? And this is a question that's been asked since, this is a solid 50 years now.
Wow.
Solid 50 years, and every time they've, as they say, kicked the can down the road. But then, and then I thought, well, what can they do now? Well, they reduced interest rates to zero and below zero in the case of Europe, which is in worse trouble than we are. And then I didn't think that they could print up trillions of dollars just like that. Well, what can they do next? What's the next arrow? Do they have another arrow in their quiver?
I mean, Japan did a lot more crazy money printing than we have, right? I mean,
they did.
Just basically buying all of the public market stocks and bonds and.
It's true, and it's not just the Japanese who buy stocks in the market. I mean, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority bought stocks, and the Swiss Central Bank is, in effect, a hedge fund buying stocks. And who knows what these other central banks are doing. I mean, it's not like they advertise what they're doing to the hoi polloi who don't understand it anyway.
But that's a bridge they haven't crossed yet, really. I mean,
yeah, they can still buy stocks, and they can buy bonds out of them. They can do a few things,
and still sending people direct money from the Fed rather than going through the Treasury. That I know they would like to do that. They tried to introduce that in a couple of bills in Congress over the last during the pandemic.
But on the other hand, retail prices are moving up at 15% or more,
Yeah.
and there are shortages. So they understand, I think, that if they put this on steroids, it's going to, no, 15% is bad. 25%, now you're looking at trouble, real trouble. I don't know. Something wicked this way comes, and it's coming soon, and it's going to be ugly. And all the gloom and doom we've been talking about for so long is going to move from the back burner to the front burner, I think.
And there's a reason to try and manage the chaos because of the election, where if some chaos is coming and they know something might happen, pulling it up like forward if it is politically helpful would make sense.
Well, yes, and what better chaos is there than a war? I mean, is it an excuse for martial law or to do stuff where it's so distracting because it's serious that now if you steal the election, get your guys in? I don't know. Anything could happen. Anyway.
Okay. Well, we've got some questions from viewers, so why don't we go ahead and answer a few of these for today, as we haven't gotten to this in a while. If you have questions for Doug, normally on Fridays we do a Q&A, and I get the questions from the Telegram group. So below this video, there's a link to the Telegram group. Go join the group, and then when I solicit questions there, you can ask them, and we'll try and get to all of them. So Doug, do you think, or this person asked, would you recommend marriage for a young person, someone who is living in the Western world?
Well, that's an interesting question. They say that people that are married are generally more successful than people that are unmarried, because two can kind of live as cheaply as one in some ways. And it's nice to have the specialization in division of labor, and it's nice to have a trusted counselor. There's all kinds of advantages. But people in the West don't realize that marriage is primarily an economic proposition, an economic union. And after the lust wears off, which inevitably happens after X period of time, it's the economics. But it's more than that. It's that most people that get married when they're young, they're thinking in superficialities and trivialities. What baseball team do you like? How's the weather? Do I like,
We share hobbies.
Yeah, hobbies or
Friend groups or...
Yeah. Do you like spaghetti or lasagna? You have discussions about that. But actually, at some point, you find you've got to be on the same philosophical wavelength. And even though most people don't think in philosophical terms, except on a really superficial level, if you hook up with somebody who's got red state values accidentally because they're really attractive and good looking, and you both really like the New York Yankees, and you got blue state values, you're going to get a divorce.
Yeah.
So I don't think you should get married when you're too young, because you're going to make a mistake.
Yeah. I think that's true. And certainly I've been down that road, but I also think you have to be more thoughtful in your selection of the person. I think anyone who I have dated in the last 10 years, I would make them do these personality tests, actually. Yeah. And I would share my results with them.
You're not talking about Rick Mayberry's...
No, if that would be a good one.
It would be a great one, actually.
Depending on how ethical they are. But because I used a lot of these for hiring employees, so I was familiar with all the different surveys that we would do and what they really meant in the real world. And I found those things pretty useful at understanding the way someone where there could be potential trouble, just like with an employee, where there could be potential trouble, or where areas of potential flashpoint because my personality might be in serious conflict with theirs in some way. But it's not obvious in the beginning because, everyone's putting their best foot forward for a while.
Exactly. Everybody has a social veneer. And in some people's case, it's a mask of sanity.
They wrap around their psychotic self.
Themselves, and you got to cut through that.
Yeah. So I think those things are good, but I think marriage is very good and very helpful, but it's also a total disaster if you get it wrong. Yeah,
it is. So proceed with great caution, which most people don't do.
Okay, someone asks, is what's happening in the world now, is it elites fighting each other, or is it just one group against the people? Is it the elites against the plebs, right now in the world, or are there actually elites sort of battling it out?
I've come to the conclusion that the kind of people that go to the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab's thing, or the Bilderbergs, which is another one of these ritzy gatherings, or on a broader level are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And there's a couple other groups like that. There's one that I even went to one time. I mean, they had Kissinger and all the rest of these horrible people at that one too. That's the one that was put together by these Greek billionaires that were our partners in the hotel in Cafajate. So that's why they invited me and Frank Justra to that one.
Yeah, Frank took me to one of his crisis group meetings.
Oh,
once.
did he really? Oh.
Yeah, it was a gala in New York.
Oh, they must have had some heavyweights there.
Hillary was the keynote speaker, and Kissinger was there at Frank's table.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was interesting.
Frank runs with those people.
He does.
I mean, but he's such a solid stand-up guy in other ways. It's just that,
I don't know.
how can you explain these things? I don't know.
Yeah. What do you think about this apparent discovery of $12 trillion worth of gold in Uganda? Have you heard of that?
That's complete nonsense. This shows how ignorant the average reporter is. I mean, there's probably somebody that found a gold deposit, and then somebody $12 trillion. It's like they were saying, there's $3 trillion worth of minerals in Afghanistan, country the size of Texas. Yeah, there probably is, but that doesn't mean
Economically,
they're not economic. And in addition to the fact, even if they were economic, who's going to want to do it? Where you have these crazy tribes that are shooting at you, and then they want to tax and all that from you. It's this thing in Uganda. I don't even remember the details because they're so muddled. But the answer is, yeah, they probably got a gold deposit there, a little thing that's going to, make a couple $100 an ounce, and maybe they'll mine 100,000 ounces a year or something. It's crazy. I mean, some reporter gets a meme, and they're not numerate anyway. They don't understand anything to do with numbers or economics. They know less than that about gold and less than that about mining. And so it just shows the low quality of discourse that we have.
Yes, getting lower by the day.
Yeah.
Chris McIntosh and others in our file are very optimistic about Turkey's future. What do you think about it?
Turkey's future? Well, Turkey only really kind of came into existence, with in 1453, with the fall of Constantinople, became the Ottoman Empire, and then after World War I, it became Turkey, and it used to be Greek. I mean, the Greeks used to own that whole part of the world.
Even Rick Mayberry often writes about what happens in Turkey, is kind of dictates some of the fate of, because he talks about a specific mosque there, that he has some symbolic meaning.
Is it the Hagia Sophia?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Which was built by the Emperor Justinian in the year 600 or something on that order. That first was a Christian church, and then became a Muslim mosque, and then became a monument for public, because it's one of the great world buildings. And I think they've converted it back to a mosque again.
I think so. I think that's what I read. But he talks about that being an area. He says, watch what happens to that building will tell you a lot about what happens in that whole part, in the chaos stand, right, is what he calls the Middle East. But I don't know, are you optimistic about Turkey?
What's going to happen with Turkey? Well, they always destroy their currency. I mean, the first time I got ripped off in Europe was by a Turkish shoeshine boy, actually. They just changed this was back in the 60s, and they just changed their old lira to a new lira. We paid in new lira, and they gave us change in old liras. And what do we need? We were just some hippies that didn't have any money. But lesson learned. Cost of like 5 cents or something like that. How can Turkey go anywhere if they've got the worst currency in Europe by far, and Erdogan is a very dirigiste kind of guy that thinks he knows best, and they got a big military which drains the economy. So what's the future for Turkey?
They certainly seem to be tugged in different directions, as a NATO member, but allied with Russia in certain things. Yeah, exactly.
If I was Turkey, I'd say, well, we should get out of NATO, because this is just a problem in waiting. But on the other hand, I'm sure they're getting bribed with a lot of money
Exactly.
to stay in NATO.
Yep.
So it's like in, when I was reading Mad Magazine when I was a kid in the 50s, and it was so clever in those days. But I remember one in particular where they had Nasser sitting around with this, swarthy-looking Arab, and the bullet holes in the wall and back up and that, and his counselor comes up to him and says, Gamal Abdel, the treasury is empty. We need some money. And he says, don't worry. He calls up the Russians. He says, hello, Russians, send me 1 million rubles or I will go over to the Americans. And he calls up the Americans. Hello, Americans, send over $1 million or I will go over to the Russians.
That's
the position Turkey could be in.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. I mean,
it's a high risk place, though. It is it's where it happens to be located from a geopolitical standpoint is not. I mean, it has advantages. Obviously, it seems as it could be a flashpoint.
Well, I've spent a reasonable amount of time in Turkey since I first went there in 1967. And actually, from being on the ground and having been there more recently, it actually doesn't seem to have changed much, believe it or not. I mean, I'm just telling you what it looks like to me as a kind of a tourist wandering around in different places in the country. Backward, primitive people. Most of them take their religion very seriously. Nothing against religion, of course, but got to say that Islam has got certain problems. What's going to happen to Turkey? What are they going to do with that big army? I mean...
Going to use it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a hammer. Yep. I mean, everything looks like a nail after a while, especially when you got a potential megalomaniac like the current guy running it. I don't know. How's this all going to end in the Ukraine and with Russia? Anything could happen. I mean, mistakes, accidents can happen.
I don't see any attempt to de-escalate.
No, to the contrary.
Yep. So how much time does it take to recognize whether you're dealing with a kindred spirit or a complete useful idiot or even the enemy?
Yeah. I'll tell you what I've found. It's that a lot of times I'll like somebody, but that can be the social veneer or the mask of sanity, which can be quite convincing. But one thing I've found is that when you catch somebody unawares, where they haven't had time to put up their veneer, that if I don't like somebody to start with, I don't think I've ever been wrong. When there was an indicator out there, a little red flag, says warning, danger, extreme danger.
Well, if you have initially a favorable impression of somebody, which I'm sure because you're well known, the people who come up to you and are talking to you know who you are, and they're definitely
putting their best foot forward.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you can be wrong based upon that. But if you get a bad first impression, that's
go with it. Trust it.
I'd say go with it because there's 8 billion people in the world. You can try to be nice to everybody.
Yeah.
Polite, cordial, but don't unnecessarily make enemies. But when you get these bad signals, pay attention. Yeah.
What was it like being on Donahue so many years ago?
Well, it was a great privilege because, of course, Donahue was as big then as Oprah was in her heyday. Yep. And I don't think we have anybody that is equivalent to either one of them out there today, do we?
I mean, as far as viewership, probably like a Joe Rogan podcast would be at that rate.
Probably,
That's really deep in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, it's as close as you come. Joe Rogan wasn't on national television in the days when everybody used to watch national television.
Exactly.
Yeah. My personal impression of Donahue was that he was personally a highly intelligent and very knowledgeable fellow. And I found probing, but polite, and you could have an intelligent discussion with him, which I think we did on that hour show where it wasn't just yelling at each other, which is what would have happened if you would have been on with a lot of people today, or just skating over something in the course of 15 or 20 seconds. So it was a good discourse, and it's on YouTube. So anybody
I'll link to it.
This should, yeah.
But look, when you watch it though, it looked like you were having a lot of fun.
I was. The
audience, but you weren't loved by the audience.
Well, there were part of that thing on YouTube was cut. There were two things that the audience, listen, I'm not the person to judge because, I was a first party participant and therefore my testimony is not objective, obviously. But it seemed to me people were kind of on my side, except in two instances. One, where we talked about college, and I said back then it was a mistake my going to college for 4 years, and I advised people against it.
And that's a shocking idea then. That's
Shocking. They booed me.
They literally booed you.
They booed me because this was breaking. Everybody's supposed to go to college because you elevate themselves, and I saw it then as being at best a misallocation of time and perhaps worse. That was one thing. And what was the other thing? I was not voting because I was on Donahue. I was fortuitous. I was on the day before the national election, or was it the day after? I don't know. It was right about November or whatever of 1980. I said something, and he said, well, you must be voting for Mr. Reagan. I said, no, I'm not voting for Reagan. And he figured, he was a smart guy. He said, well, you must be voting for the Libertarian, whoever that was. And I said, no, I'm not voting for the Libertarian. Explained, I don't believe in voting. And I got as far as, and he said, why not? And I got as far as giving, I think I got up to giving 4 out of the 5 reasons why I wasn't voting. But the audience was becoming so restive and hateful at the thought of an American saying why I wasn't voting. The 5th reason, which I never got to, is your vote doesn't count. The crowd would have.
They booed you. They shut you down before you even got there, though, which is so great.
No, it would have been too hard. But the part that they cut out of that, the video that's on YouTube, was when somebody in the audience, I was shocked, and they cut it out because he said, I was talking about the government spending money or the taxpayers having to pay for these things. And some guy raises his hand, and Phil, and he says, well, why do we have to pay for it? Why can't the government pay for it? And everybody clapped like this was a cosmic breakthrough.
Yeah, easy solution.
I mean, this is how stupid the average American was even then, and it's much worse now.
Much worse.
And as further evidence, I not only mount Jay Leno's jaywalking, but Mark Dice does
great.
when he does his
Man on the street stuff.
Man on the street stuff. It's great. It's just incredible how little people know. Anyway, the fact that somebody in the audience, and the editors cut this out, said, well, why can't the government pay for this? Why do we have to pay for it? And everybody clapped.
Yeah.
It's not like everybody looked at him like he was a fool.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It is amazing.
But people feel the same way now, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
More
for
so.
Sure. More so.
How much did that change your level of fame being on Donahue?
A lot, because as soon as I got out of the studio, I walked into a men's room and right away, I mean, not the best venue, obviously. And it says, hey, weren't you the guy who was? Yeah. I said, yes, I was. And the rest of the day in Chicago, I mean, everybody watched it in Chicago, of all places, because that's where it took place. So, yeah, it was wonderful having my 15 minutes of fame.
Well, it's 15 minutes. You've stretched it out for quite a while, though, to be honest.
But things become diluted after a while, and, new characters come up, and the news cycle drives on and so forth. So, well,
that's a great video. If you haven't seen it, I'll link to it below this. You should definitely watch it. You see Doug at peak Doug. It was fantastic.
Yeah. Well, fame is overrated, but like everything else, you want to have been there and done that. So nothing against it, but as a constant diet, it's like eating, sugar all the time.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Well, if you had to choose between rich and famous,
I'd go for rich every
100%,
time.
yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Although you can translate the one to the other if you're clever.
Yeah, you can leverage one for the other, that's for sure. But it's there's a lot more downside to being famous, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's better to be rich and not terribly well known as being rich, because then you're subject to envy and people treating you in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise. And so it's better to be rich and kind of quietly rich.
Why do you think that Western nations seem to be the target of multiculturalism? Like, why is it flourishing here and not elsewhere?
Yes, because, they don't have multiculturalism
in China
or in Japan or in Thailand, although they have these groups well, certainly in China and Thailand, that aren't really Thais or not really Chinese, but it's not multicultural. I mean, if you're a member of a non, forget about it. You're just an outsider. So it's because we're stupid. I mean,
But isn't it a logical conclusion of liberalism, though, that it ends up being that? I mean, doesn't it almost end up that way?
well, partially because they consider all cultures to be equally good, or actually, today, all cultures are better than Western culture.
Right.
Western civilization is evil, and, all the things that go into this whole thing about they've got things stood on its head. It's funny because the Westerners are the only people that allow foreigners to come into their country, and they're treated just like everybody else and so forth. That doesn't happen in the Oriental cultures. You can forget about it. It doesn't happen in Africa. I mean, Europeans impose themselves on the Africans, of course, but now, increasingly, the Africans are kind of feeling their oats, and Africa is no longer the place for a white man. They're saying, hey, your ancestors came in here and conquered us 100 years ago. Get the hell out of here. So, yeah, the West is unique that way.
But it's almost like it's a bug in maybe the Western values in a way, because not recognizing when you actually undermine values by being so open. You know what I mean? It's like...
Yeah, exactly. It's, not that people from different cultures are your enemies. I mean, that's not true.
Not, yeah.
But, it's like if Canada imported 50 million Nigerians, it wouldn't be Canada anymore.
Right.
And if the Canadians now have a high standard of living, and Trudeau accepted and all that, it's, but it would, Toronto would be like Lagos, and it would not be an improvement. So, they just don't understand that. And of course, the kids are all taught that the West is evil and all that. But if any of these kids tried to move to China and integrate themselves into China, forget about it. It's not going to happen. It might be a curiosity. If you're rich, okay, that's one thing, and there's not too many of you. But no, it's what we have is really unique, but it's being washed away right before our very eyes.
So you've alluded to this before, but the question is, are second passports worthless in near future as digital IDs take over?
Yeah, that's an astute observation, actually. It's that, maybe it looks like they're going towards a World Health Passport, which has to be updated with your vaxes and so forth, which will probably be subsumed by the United Nations, which will amount to a de facto UN passport. Yeah, it's true, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have, at least for the next decade or two, a second national passport.
Yeah, good backup to have while it's still useful.
Exactly, because if you don't have a national passport now, which is the property of every government that issues them, they take it away from you. Now what are you going to do?
Well, and I think what is the deal with the IRS in the U.S. If they say that you owe $50,000, then they take away your passport. If you get accused of it.
Accused of it?
Yes.
Don't have to. Yeah, it doesn't have to be. And now you're here in the U.S. It's much like having been a Soviet citizen in the old days. You weren't allowed to leave.
Yes. What do you think about, what's your comment on Sri Lanka's current move after its peasant revolt? Suddenly now, military moves in. QR codes with digital IDs are implemented to ration fuel. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh, no, I didn't.
You have an app on your phone. Every week you get an allocation for fuel for the week. Through a QR code, you go to the gas station to get your ration.
That's great. So, if you don't need it, then you can sell it for an inflated price, and it's a black market, and there'll be all kinds, nothing wrong with black markets. I mean, they're free markets, but it arises corruption, all that. I mean, these people, they're just...
Isn't it amazing how quickly they rolled that out, this digital rationing system in a country that basically that people are sleeping in the presidential bed 10 days ago?
Yeah, and if they're not sleeping in the presidential bed, they're sleeping in a gutter or under a bridge. So it really is quite amazing.
I think, and this is what the theory was, that on all the vaccine, on the back of the vaccine passports or the digital tracking around the vaccines or around COVID, you could layer in these rationing and access technologies. And it seems like Sri Lanka is already there. I mean, maybe because of the vaccine stuff that was already out there, everyone already had government apps or was comfortable with using those to enter certain buildings and so forth. And they rolled out for rationing right away.
That's right. It became very easy to slide into the next level.
Yeah, when they literally had no food or fuel in the country, but they have apps. That's where they track the rationing.
Yeah, it's quite incredible, and it's true all over the world, because if you're a young African, after you buy a second T-shirt, probably a used T-shirt imported from the West, the very next thing you buy is a smartphone. Mm-hmm. It'll cost you $50, but somehow you get that together.
That's good. Yeah, this will be interesting to see the way this evolves, but I think the digital access to goods and services is going to increase.
I think you're absolutely right. And somehow that's going to facilitate the desire of the elite. Actually, they're the parasites, but they're generally called the elite. It's kind of, once again, something. Parasites have been reversed.
Exactly.
I mean, further corruption of the language. I really do think that they would like to reduce the world's population from 8 billion to 6, 5, 4, 500,000, like those
Guidestone said, yeah.
Yeah, whoever put them up.
Or took them down is another question.
All these mysteries, you know? I mean, all we get is news snippets that go on for 15 seconds or maybe 30 seconds sometimes, and then the news cycle rolls on to distract you.
You get out of context data points.
Yes, out of context and meaningless, and when you get context, it's misinterpreted or misdirected. It's just amazing. I mean, and nobody reads books anymore or has intelligent conversations, it seems. Everybody's watching television to see what's happening on the game or something.
Or Twitter or other social media where they're propagandized.
Yeah, no, the way this is evolving, it's actually pretty fascinating. It's kind of free entertainment, except it's not actually as free as it looks to be.
It's not free, no. So next question, stagflation looks very probable right now. Isn't that a dream scenario for gold mining stocks?
Well, a couple of fundamentals. It used to be that when they reported the costs of mining gold, it was the cash cost, just the cash cost of actual, how much to get that next ounce out of the ground. And a lot of people don't remember that when gold was officially at $35 an ounce, South African gold mines were mining gold that are reported $12 or $15 or $20 or $30 an ounce. Okay. Today they use what are called all-in sustaining costs, which not only is just the cash cost of the fuel and labor and things like that, but it even includes the cost of replacing the reserve that you've mined out this year, and projected future cost of planting grass on the thing after it's all mined out, and all this kind of thing. So all-in sustaining costs is a really total cost, all in long term. And industry-wide among producers, it's still about $1,000 an ounce. That's the average. Some companies are lower. Some companies are, right here at $1,700, $1,800. Okay, so that's great. But the problem is that cost of fuel, which is really big for mining, is doubled. Cost of labor's gone up. So costs of mining are rising. But I think, here's an opinion. I think that the price of gold, and I've said this for several years, price of gold is kind of like about relative to other stuff, more or less what it should be. There was this meme that's been out there for a long time. A sovereign will get you and 3 friends a fine meal in the best restaurant in London, or buy you a fine suit. Okay, that's kind of
still true.
Kind of more or less, yeah, it's kind of stayed the same. So gold is not like at a giveaway level, which it was in 1971, or for that matter, in 2001, when in real terms it was actually cheaper than it was in 1971. It's not at that level. It's like at a equilibrium level, but I think it's going to go a lot higher, because I keep repeating, because it's very important, it's the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability.
Right.
You could say it a Bitcoin, perhaps, but
yeah,
Bitcoin is a little different. Maybe it's still kind of early days to really be sure how Bitcoin will sort out. Maybe there's still room for a Bitcoin 2.0.
Could be. But what about the gold stocks? Because people are shocked that they have responded to the current environment the way that they have. People haven't been following gold stocks for a while, especially.
I'm surprised that actually gold stocks are very cheap right now. Some of them have good dividend yields. Two places you really want to be are gold stocks and silver stocks, which are kind of crappy and flaky by comparison for a number of reasons. Oil stocks and natural gas stocks more than either of them, actually.
What about uranium?
And uranium, absolutely uranium. Maybe coal still, too. Although coal's run up a lot. But those are the cheapest things out there today. And I am really, really overweight because I don't want to own most things. And, I'm familiar with the space. And right now, gold stocks, relatively speaking, and oil and uranium too, and so forth, are the cheapest things out there.
Yeah.
And there will be panic into them, I think.
Basically, the whole market's been moving down, basically all sectors except for some commodities.
Yeah, but you got to recall, it's that the average fund manager does not want to own resource stocks because they're, dirty, playing in the dirt kind of industries, and the people that are involved with gold and mining are not very ESG oriented.
No.
I mean, it's not the way they think, thank God. And so fund managers don't want to own them for that reason, and they don't want to own gold stocks also because they don't believe in gold.
Right.
They think it's a pet rock and it's stupid, and so they don't own it for that reason. I mean, it's like some stupid high-tech app stock that I might not have wanted to own when it was worth $100 billion. Well, they feel the same way.
Yeah.
So, they're really cheap. They're under-owned. And the average person in the public, like the younger generations, are just interested in technology and not gold. So nobody's interested in gold. Well, that's a really good reason to own gold stocks.
Yeah.
Unless you and it's not a pet rock. It's actually money. So
yeah. So basically, people who are relatively new to this, investing in these, haven't, they've only seen what's happened over the last year or the last 2 years, where basically they've kind of marched down.
Yep.
But the theory is that at some point, like there has been before, there's a catalyst in the market that starts to change the momentum around that, and at that point, they really start to move up.
Yes, and actually, as I've just said, if all-in sustaining costs are, let's say, 1,000, and gold is at, let's say, 1,700 or 1,800, it's a very, very profitable business right now. They're actually, the in-production miners are actually coining money. And I say that in the context of it being a really crappy business, all kinds of different reasons. Having a gold mine is not, to use the old phrase, like having a gold mine. Your troubles are just starting. But is there any really good business that you can be in now?
Well, I mean, there's a general shift, right? From everything's gone from growth to value stocks. So people are starting to move into those stocks. And so there probably are some good companies within the value sector, I guess, if you can call it a sector, profit-generating businesses, you might call them. There have to be some, but I'm not, there's none. If you figure if there's a recession, especially if there's a global recession, then those things become, at risk too. Everything becomes a risk.
That's right. People are going to tighten their belts, not going to buy as much, earnings will go down. And people forget that how cheap stocks can get sometimes. And that's reflected in cheap, where stocks will yield 10 or 15% or 20% in current dividend yields, usually after the dividends have already been cut. And it's nobody. So by the time this bear market comes to an end, nobody's going to even want to know stocks exist. They'll get angry at you if you even mention the existence of stocks, just from the opposite of what it was a short while ago when
everybody's invested. Or my 14-year-old nephew's texting me about GameStop.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. Do you have any thoughts about the banking situation in China right now? Seems to be some issues popping up.
I think so, because the Belt and Road Initiative, you can say some good things about it. To me, the Belt and Road thing is basically a government pork barrel project where huge amounts have been misallocated and bribes paid and bankrolls padded of people in these different countries. And maybe all these places where the Belt and Road are going, they decide, we really don't want these Chinese here. They're dangerous characters that are looking to take advantage of us. That might all blow up. And the cities built in the middle of nowhere, which really exist. I don't know how many of them there really are. And, roads to nowhere and bridges to nowhere, just developing these are government projects, basically. So how do they finance these things? Well, I guess the banks basically lend for it, and they lend to the construction companies that built these things that now owe the money to the banks. So that I wouldn't be surprised if most of the banks in China are bankrupt, and if the government bails them out, they'll destroy the currency. So either way, Mrs. Wu, who's been saving 50% of her income for a long time, she's going to be really unhappy, either when she doesn't get her money back, or the money she gets back is
worth so much less.
Yeah, it's basically toilet paper. It's a problem. And if, as the Greater Depression goes on and consumption goes on, those factories cranking stuff out in China, there won't be as much demand for their stuff, and they'll have to unemploy their workers. And these things can get out of control.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want to own a Chinese bank right now.
No, and you got to imagine, though, with all the incredible growth that China has experienced over the last couple of decades, there must be lots of leverage in that system as people grew to try and keep up with the demand for consumer products. So I imagine a lot of the businesses, a lot of the real estate, all leveraged. And if the income slows down because there's a recession of some kind or depression, then that could cause cascading negative consequences, no?
Yes, it could. So you could go from crazy rich Asians to whatever the opposite is.
Yeah, wait for part 3 of that show.
Right.
Doug, what does it mean to have sound ethics?
Well, okay, sound ethics. Christians might say, well, you observe the 10 Commandments. I'm not sure, even though I'm interested in things like this, I could name 10 Commandments. I could spill them off right now. And of course, you got to say, are you going to take the Catholic version or the Protestant version or the Jewish version of the 10 Commandments? So, okay, but I don't think they're a particularly good guide. So, how about good ethics?
Well, we were talking about Richard Mayberry yesterday in the 17-word solution, which is his way he defined it.
Yeah, very, very good. Rick gets a little bit picayune about the exactness of his particular definition, but he's absolutely right, absolutely right. And I admire Rick for promoting, do all that you say you're going to do and don't aggress against other people or their property. Okay, do that. I like to keep things simple. And you can't remember the thousands and thousands of volumes of laws. So ignorance of the law is not an excuse. That's total bullshit, because of course it's an excuse. You can't know all these stupid laws, even the 10 Commandments.
Right, you can't.
So it's easy to remember two things. Two things like 2, 3, many. Primitive people count that way.
Which we are.
We are. So you can remember two things. Everybody can do that. But I think it's easier to remember one thing. And my one thing is I'm just looking at people the way they are. The whole of the law is do as thou wilt, but be prepared to accept the consequences. People forget that second part. So figure things out. And if you have to figure everything out yourself, maybe you'll make the wrong decision, but at least it'll be a thought out decision.
I mean, that's a good political philosophy, I think, because you're understanding that you can exercise power or use force on others or coerce your environment or structure your environment, to use a better word, but there are consequences or repercussions from everything that you might do. But I don't know if that provides an ethical framework so much.
Well, yeah.
This is more of a recognition of reality.
Yeah, you're right. But maybe having good ethics is just recognizing reality, however you interpret it. Because if you have what most people would consider bad ethics, where people say, that's a bad dude, bad guy. Well, what are the consequences of that? Is it going to end well? Well, sometimes I guess it does.
For a while.
Yeah.
I think of it as, that's true. I guess I just think of it as that the ethical part is if you're doing something, and this is, I guess, what Rick Mayberry is really talking about, if you're doing something that is exacting, that's coercive or acting with force against another person in some way, then that's violence, I guess, in a form of violence.
Yeah.
And that has consequences, and you should try and avoid engaging in any preemptive violence on anybody and anything.
Of course, Rick's 17-word solution, does it really talk about the consequences? It just says what you should do.
Yeah, it just doesn't have the consequences
I
at all.
kind of like it. Everybody does do. They justify or rationalize doing what they want somehow. Let's think out the consequences of this. Maybe this is why economics is not a division of mathematics, which is what most people think because of the arcane formulas that PhD economists use, incomprehensible and meaningless formulas. It's a division of ethics because an economist is, one definition, is a person that can see not only the immediate and direct consequences of what you do, but the indirect and delayed ones of what you do. Do what you want, but be prepared to accept the consequences. Well, what are the consequences? Let's figure them out. Immediate and direct, delayed and indirect, and take it out as far as you want.
So you're saying a recognition of reality. If you simply can recognize reality, then you will almost necessarily behave in an ethical manner.
I think it's a good survival strategy for the long run.
Okay.
Yeah, but this is a really interesting subject that is hard to deal with because you can set up all kinds of straw men.
Yeah.
What if? That old philosophical problem. It's that you're in control of a switch and a train is running out of control. One person or 100 people, and who are you going to kill?
Yep.
Yeah, that thing. And you can structure it in so many different ways where you're directly responsible for killing that person, but not really responsible for the other 100 people dying.
Right.
So, which is better? Listen.
Yeah, they try and push you down a utilitarian thinking around it, where more lives are saved and all that. But that seems like that's the wrong way to view any ethical thing, is a utilitarian fashion to me.
Yeah, I just don't like to use coercion against other people. But on the other hand, as John Hunt and I explore in our last novel in particular, and actually all three of the novels, is that I'm of the opinion there are some people that just need killing.
Yeah.
Even if they've never done anything immediate and direct to me.
Yeah.
So do I have a right to reach out and touch them, as it were?
And this is where you push the boundaries in the ethical question of, do what you will, but be prepared to accept the consequences.
That's right. Well, what's the worst they can do to you? They can execute you. I guess they could torture you before they execute you. That'd be bad.
But yeah. And I think, here's an example of, there's a story that circulates as meme online every once in a while where it's a guy who waits for somebody who molested his daughter outside of the courtroom and assassinates him. Mm-hmm. And I don't think most people who see that are going to be like, that was totally ethical.
Yeah.
That was the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
And he goes to jail and totally fine with going to jail, totally embracing the consequences of it because, but he did what he thought was right.
But if he lived in a properly
functioning society,
a free market society, any juror, you would acquit him.
Yeah.
So you don't need to pass laws about if you kill somebody, you just leave it up to the jury to decide. And of course, this leads to, one question leads to another. That's why I believe in jury nullification, which is basically illegal in the U.S. But interestingly, most people are unaware of the fact that jury nullification is one of the things that a jury is supposed to do. They're supposed to judge the law.
Right. And now, so that's illegal in the U.S.
Oh, pretty much. You're not supposed to say that it'll be a mistrial if anybody mentions that the jury can judge the rightness or wrongness of the law the person's being prosecuted
really?
for.
Yeah. I know they always give very narrow directions, the judge does, to the jury, to decide whether or not technically this thing was violated in this way.
You guys are really nothing but a computer to decide this. You have no independent thought about what's right and wrong. That's beyond your ken.
Jury nullification. Yeah. You mentioned Economists. I don't know if you saw this. Paul Krugman had an interview yesterday or the day before. You'd love it because I know you love Paul Krugman.
Oh, I love Paul Krugman.
And he's talking about, they asked him why the inflation situation and how we got here and why didn't we see it. And he starts off by saying, well, of course, there were a number of factors that no one could have seen coming, including the war in Ukraine, he says.
Of course not.
But also the supply chain issues, like we never imagined this.
Who could have imagined that?
Yes. This just shows the economists live in these spreadsheets, in these models, in these calculations or whatever, and totally ignore reality around them. Everybody saw this coming.
Yeah.
Or if you're a little paying attention.
Yeah. How come these people are famous and listened to and lauded, and where it's obvious that they're practically drooling idiots, at least in the realm of economics?
Clearly, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
It's just, we live in bizarro world, I think.
Like, if you were going to start a gold storage company, what country would you choose?
Well, you know, it's funny because one of the nice things about Freedom Fest is Jim Rogers is a very old and dear friend of mine, and we spent a lot of time talking about that. And we're asking each other because he's, of course, been around the world and visited at least as many countries as I have, and we're asking each other, well, where to go? What's the safe place? And it's a really rough question about where you live or where your money should live, or for that matter, gold storage should live. So I guess you got to deal with what exists, not what we wish exists. So where's the best place for a gold storage place? I think in Latin America, I think the answer is Uruguay at the moment. But anything can happen anywhere. Panama used to be, but are they going crazy in Panama now?
They're going, yep, they're blocking the Pan American Highway in a number of spots, demanding lower food and fuel prices and ending government corruption. So their demands, I don't think, are going to be met.
No. Well, you wouldn't have to end government corruption if you got rid of
Government.
Government.
It's only
and all their laws.
Yeah.
Corruption's there to get around the stupid laws. So, okay, that's not... And at the same time, they're blocking the Pan American Highway. This is kind of backwards. I understand at the same time, they're opening up the Darien Gap, which is where people come up from South America through rather rough and dangerous jungle to...
Very difficult part to get through, yeah.
So they're making it easier to get through the Darien Gap, but harder to drive on the...
Well, and it's created a problem because they're basically getting lots of migrants now that are getting stuck in Panama. The bottleneck is Panama now instead of just a simple transfer moving them up, to North America.
Yeah, what do you do in a country where you have people that have no money, not many skills, nothing but the clothes on their back, and there's thousands and thousands of them hanging around? Now what do you do with those people?
I think you give them an app with QR codes and you start rationing them stuff, apparently, as Sri Lanka says.
I guess that's what you do. That's right. That's right. And then they can go down to the 7-Eleven and get a hot dog 3 times a day. Problem solved.
Exactly.
That's right. And got to build more bridges so they can have a place to sleep at night.
Yeah, they need some cover when it rains there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
the bridge works.
That's right. And that's why God made space blankets and passed those out for people, and crazy.
Was there anything else that Jim said? Because you hadn't,
Oh, yeah. What did he say? Well, I think I always enjoy talking to Jim. He's
great.
John. He's a smart guy.
Extremely humble, too.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And Jimmy's a genuine billionaire, but he's he often refers to the fact that he came from kind of a backwoods, nothing, nowhere place in Alabama. And
Poor Alabama boy.
Poor Alabama boy. And he says, yes, I remember the last girl I was going out with there. And he said that he'd like to go to New York City and see what things like. He says, his girlfriend at the time says to him, well, I've been around. I've been to Birmingham. I've been to Mobile. I've been down on the beach. I've been to the beach on the coast and pretty well seen everything. So,
not a good match for Jim.
No, so they had to part company. But so what did he say? I guess we both agreed there was no place that was ideal. So what was the best place to be? He agrees that Uruguay at the moment is the best place to be in Latin America.
Okay.
And in Central America, I've never been a fan of Central America. It's the land of the Frito Bandito. Costa Rica, most civilized, most European place, full of gringos.
Lots of Canadians.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's the best place. And, Nicaragua, you still got Ortega, or is it Ortiz? Whatever that guy that buys the expensive sunglasses, he's still running the place. He's, but, you go down there and you live on, Bill Bonner's development, which I was a partner in that thing to start with.
Rancho Santana.
Rancho Santana, right.
It's a really nice place.
It's a very nice place, and they don't bother you, and everything's cool. And so it doesn't matter, no matter where you are, you live in your little silo is what it is. But where do you go? Where do in fact you go?
Is he feeling good about Singapore still?
Yeah, he feels okay about Singapore, but it's an international city, but it's a city. And it's kind of dangerous in an area where you got all these poor Indonesians to the south, and you got the Chinese that might decide that they don't like the fact that too many rich Chinese are using it as an asset haven, and the fact that, like a quarter of the population are something like that, or East Indians, and I don't know. So it's a city, and it's not what it used to be when Lee Kuan Yew was running it. It's like everything else. It's degrading and falling apart around the edges.
It's like a big company. Once the founder leaves and the executive team takes over, it starts to degrade.
Yes, it does. The corruption and the sloppiness fits in there. And Singapore's okay. I mean, Hong Kong's definitely not what it used to be. I used to love Hong Kong, but it's just a big Chinese city now with an extra layer of problems. So where do you go and where do you put your money? So Singapore is one of the places. Cayman Islands.
Dubai. What about Dubai for banking?
I think that's a good choice, although it's like not the friendliest part of the world. I mean, that might be okay.
But for banking?
I think that might be okay. And a place to store your gold, too. Very gold friendly there. I think Dubai is a good choice. And in the Western Hemisphere, closer to home, I think the Cayman Islands is probably pretty good. Sociologically, very stable, actually. So, everything's got its set of problems, but I like that's a good choice. All the islands, it's by far the best choice. Bermuda's not a bad choice either from that point of view. Where else? Where do you go? Africa, forget about it. Elsewhere in the Orient, Australia and New Zealand once was a good idea. And maybe the way that they got locked down like whip dogs and rolled over on their backs and wet themselves, no, not so much anymore. It's quite a problem. The world is becoming a smaller place. And Klaus Schwab wants to see it be smaller yet.
Your accent's getting better, Doug. All right, one more question for you then. You'll like this one, I think. You'll argue with the premise, I think, of this question. It says, can the ideal of democracy ever work in the real world, given the corruption, short-sightedness, and sheer stupidity inherent in the human race?
I think it can work in a group of close friends that share values and like each other. Yeah, okay, so I'm all for democracy with like 5 or 6 guys who want to decide where to go for dinner.
Yeah.
Works okay.
Yep.
Usually.
In that small group, it's a good way to find consensus. Because but it actually isn't, it's not like in that group, you'd never be in a situation where 6 people are saying we want to go to the steakhouse and 4 people are, vegans. It would never, because you would never actually reach a consensus that way. So democracy in small groups works because there's an effort, there's a desire among that group to reach consensus where we're all fine with what happens.
And nobody is going to use coercion to impose their will on the other 3 or 4 guys.
Exactly, and you're interested in your friends getting what they want. Like you want them to have a nice time too. So that's why consensus is built. Democracy as a consensus builder works in small groups.
Small groups.
No consent. What's the consensus in our democracy?
There is
none.
None at all. And not only none, but less all the time. Because it used to be, we believed in, Superman with the American truth, justice, the American way.
Yeah.
And we shared holidays and we shared values and we shared a language and everybody understood the basis of, our historical context, even if a lot of it was made up or inaccurate, it was kind of more or less. So, we were all kind of, together. And we had, 12% were blacks and they had their own thing. That was okay. I mean, and we had a few Mexicans. That was okay. And, around the edges, nobody had a problem. But now the U.S. has become a multicultural domestic empire, and it's got to fly apart. It's got to. So the answer is democracy itself is not a good idea where there's any coercion involved. It's not a question of consensus that you were talking about. So, no, it's like a god for people. I think it was Schumpeter said that democracy is like an ersatz religion for people that are deprived of God or something like that.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, they worship it like it's the answer.
Well, and that's the way it's pitched and sold. I mean, we're fighting for democracy in Ukraine, or we're encouraging them to fight for democracy.
And it's all bullshit because it's not democracy. You get to elect the guy who tells you what to do. That's not democracy. It's not even like the democracy of the ancient Athenians, which was, was actually a kind of a plebiscitary democracy, and they definitely all shared the same culture and all that. So, all right, that was one thing, but no, it's just nothing.
When you can't have, when you just talked about the Superman quote or whatever you want to call it, with truth, justice, and the American way. I mean, just with that phrase alone, you can see how fundamentally broken everything is, because
no truth, no justice.
What is the American way? I don't even know.
Yeah, that's pretty well right.
I've seen this interview with Matt Walsh, who does this Daily Wire guy, basically asking people what a woman is, going around and talking to different people, asking the question. And in one of it, he starts saying, they're saying, well, how do you define it, and et cetera. And he's like, well, I just want to get at the truth. And this gender studies professor says, that's like patriarchal white supremacist talk. Like I'm feeling uncomfortable with you talking about truth.
So, is that actually what?
Yeah. So like truth is actually, it's not only do we not agree what is true, we don't agree that truth itself is something worthy of pursuit as a culture.
Yes, it's, there's really no hope when people are thinking that way. So there's got to be a radical change in thinking. And that's going to be painful, because I think most people buy that woke.
Well, they certainly have control of the steering wheel at this point, that's for sure, of all the institutions.
Academia, totally. Media, totally. Corporations, yes. And what other areas? NGOs?
Totally, completely, yeah. Long gone.
Yeah. So yeah, it's everywhere. It's like we're fish swimming in the water of a cesspool at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, one more question for you, Doug. What's any exciting plans for this summer? Anything coming up on your schedule? Any events you're participating in?
Well, what am I going to do? I'm going to go to Mexico City for the Rebel Capitalist.
Oh, no, Nomad Capitalist.
Nomad Capitalist, yeah. Right.
We're at Rebel Capitalist.
So many capitalists out there these days.
So few, though, I think, really.
Yeah, but so few. That's right. It's a paradox. So anyway, Mr. Henderson is having a conference there. And I guess Robert Kiyosaki is going to be there again.
It's in Mexico City this time instead of Playa del Carmen?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that'll be fine. So I'm going to go down there in September. And where else? I think I'm going to visit New Orleans for the
investment conference
in person, and then scamper off to Uruguay and Argentina. Come just in time for the elections, because I'm afraid that there's going to be violence around the elections. I mean, it's not a prediction, but it's a distinct possibility.
It's a high stakes time.
It is. So I'm sure that whoever the people in back of Antifa and BLM and something else that these people will fabricate to come up with are figuring out where to deliver their loads of bricks to be thrown and stuff.
And if not before the elections, then after the elections, upset with the results, right? That could happen too.
You got to plan for the contingency. That's right. Exactly. Okay. Yeah, so anyway. Am I going to do anything else? No, I hope to get in this place where we are now. I've got a really nice professional gym down in the basement, so I'll get that set up and hope to get back in shape so I'm not hobbling around like a cripple. That would be helpful. And try to be better disciplined about things in general and spend less time on my computer and more time reading some really good books I've got in the library.
Got a good book selection here.
I do. But interesting, can you disclose what you're doing book-wise in Uruguay?
Yeah, so my ambition is to build the largest English language library in South America. I don't know exactly what that would take, but I'm starting it off with, I bought a defunct college's library of 30,000 books. And that'll be the anchor of it. So
very good start. You'll have all the basics, and that's fantastic.
I'm trying to preserve stuff because I don't like everything being digital. It just disappears, it seems, so easily.
No, it can. That's one of the big problems with Bitcoin. If we get a massive solar mass ejection, I don't know how long it would take for stuff to come back. And would it be permanently erased?
Well, distributed ledger shouldn't be, but, it could cause a lot of problems.
Yeah, so I prefer reading stuff on paper. I know it's old school, but I like it better.
Yeah, I think it's way better. I retain the information much better myself. But
so anyway, Matt's going to have this fantastic library in Uruguay. And that's great.
I'm going to turn it into a private club, is the idea. So then it's a private library, but my friends can go.
Yeah, it'll be civilized. Can I smoke a cigar?
Of course you can. Yeah, of course.
Good. That is a proper library.
You have to do that. All right. Well, good. Well, thanks a lot, Doug. I appreciate it. Good to do this in person.
Thanks, Matt. Absolutely.